Hello, everyone, and hi, Ollie.
Hi everybody. Hi Marcos.
Awesome. All right. So we thought this week we do something a bit more planty because we haven't done any planty ones for a while. Obviously, we're going to be talking astrology as well, but we'll be focusing a bit more on the plants this episode. And because it's currently autumn in the UK, it's Scorpio season. So we thought we'd do sort of Scorpio power plants or just a few plants that we would assign to that sign. But before we get into that, I just want to read a brief description of the sign Scorpio, and this is from Abu Mashar's abbreviation of the Introduction to Astrology. He's an Arabic astrologer. I can't remember from which century, maybe the 10th century or 11th century. I cannot remember, but anyway, this is what he had to say. Scorpio is the house of Mars. It has three decans. The first decan belongs to Mars, the second to the Sun, the third to Venus. Its nature is cold and moist, watery, phlegmatic, and it is a feminine sign, nocturnal, fixed, and dark. To it are beasts of prey and water animals, flowing waters, and trees of moderate height, having many children, corrupt, cautious, prone to anger, lying, master of cares, beautiful in face, generous of soul, and without voice. To it, the body of man are the penis, the testicles, the bladder, the rump, and the perineum. And I think we'd probably add to that the womb and the bowel. And then he talks about some countries in the Middle East that he thinks are under Scorpio. All right. So, I mean, Ollie, what do you want to open with a
Okay,
herb
I'm going
that
to
you think
open
might be under
with
Scorpio? Yeah.
a classic herb, very popular in the modern herbal pharmacopoeia, which is chaste tree, also Latin Vitex agnus, um, and it's an interesting one because Culpeper does mention it, but not as a main entry.
Right.
He says Agnus castus and chaste tree expels wind, consumes the seas, causes chastity, being only born about one. It dissolves swellings of the testicles, being applied to them, headache and lethargy, which is an interesting one. So I actually didn't know about the expelling wind, but obviously it was historically used by monks to promote chastity, where you apparently often find it around ruined monasteries growing.
Mm.
And Yes, and the swelling of testicles again. It's of course we know it's
Yes.
now a hormone modulator now, but particularly and it's a what's interesting here is that it's very often used for fertility issues and women's hormonal issues, which Culpeper doesn't mention at all.
Right. Does
Hence,
he assign it to Mars, Ollie?
it
Does
doesn't here, but it is assigned to Mars. But I was trying to find the association to Mars because I've always had it assigned to Mars.
yeah. I mean, I've always wondered about that because I've never actually seen it assigned to Mars in an old text. But I mean, I
Interesting.
guess it was. I think, as you said, it was called monk's pepper, and
Monk's pepper, yes.
it does have that. Seeds do have that slightly peppery taste, and it does have this weird sort of fetid, half aromatic smell, doesn't it?
It does, it does. And I mean, it's not, I mean, it's a lovely picture you've got there, but I grow one in my garden and that's like a real close up. It's not a sort of particularly attractive, I mustn't hit here, might be upset. I mean, it's not a classically sort of Venusian herb that shouts at you like, I'm beautiful. Though it is
Right.
obviously all plants are beautiful. It's
Yeah.
quite spiky. You could give that slightly phallic look of the little flowers.
Okay. That's definitely a Mars signature, isn't
So,
it?
I mean, there is no. And actually, to be honest, in use, I've always, in the horrors I've done when Mars has been called for, and I've used Vitex, that's always worked for me.
Right.
So
That's
often that,
interesting.
so I don't know. I mean, what do you assign it to,
No,
Marco?
I've sort of thought it was Mars as well, just because of that monk's pepper
Yeah,
traditional
yeah,
associate. Even though nowadays it's used mainly in sort of gynecological sort of support,
yes.
like for regulating the menstrual cycle and for sort of helping some perimenopausal symptoms and stuff like that. It does have that also the sort of regulating anterior pituitary function. The large because of the large doses will sort of shut down anterior pituitary function a little bit just through its
Yes,
dopamine releasing action. I made very good use of that 15 years ago when I had a client come in who had a benign pituitary adenoma, and
right.
I think I gave them a mix with three things in from what I remember. I think there was what was that, the iris versicolor or blue flag, um, high dose of Vitex chase tree and something else, and it worked amazingly well. Like their
Interesting.
symptoms just within a month, they sort of all just went away. So it's a powerful plan, and yeah, I think I'd agree with you. I think I'd put it under Mars, but I'm not sure that I've fully examined the reasons as to why. I've just sort of thought
I
it's
didn't,
called
to be
Pepper, and
honest, till today, until I looked up in Culpeper, I could have sworn there was an entry that said like blah blah blah. This is under the virtue of Mars, but it wasn't. So it was
no,
that a surprise.
yeah, he doesn't, does he? And
No.
sometimes I think we autocomplete Culpeper in our
Yeah.
mind. We sort
Yeah.
of go, "Oh, that's that," you know. But so you think in its appearance, it's slightly spiky, and
It's spiky. It's yeah. I mean, it's not a super obvious Mars signature, but it's not a super obvious Venus signature either, and it's
no,
not
it's
one or
definitely.
the other.
I agree. Although this is a pretty picture, as you say, because they focused in on the flowers,
Yes.
it actually has something of a somber look. Sometimes the tree,
It's
and
quite, it can look a little bit bedraggled, and it's not big. It is a small tree as well, so it would
yes,
fit under Scorpio for that.
I mean,
But
exactly.
definitely,
That's what I was coming on to. So the Scorpio assignation, because that is separate from that, because we're going to be
yes,
choosing that the examples we've chosen will be ruled by various different planets, but they all, for various reasons that we'll talk about, will assign them a secondary assignation to the sign of Scorpio. And for practical purposes, most of the time, the most important thing is to know what planet a plant or medicine is assigned to.
yeah.
So we're kind of putting the cart before the horse here a little bit. But what made you think this was more Scorpio? I would agree, but just interested in sort of why.
I thought it's to do with sympathy and antipathy. I think that
Mm,
I mean, if you look at the receptions, and for not so astrologers are here, that various planets are happier or unhappier in various zodiac signs, which is called the receptions. And in Scorpio, Mars is the ruler and is extremely happy there.
mm,
And Venus is not at all happy there in her detriment.
mm.
So you could, yes, that's right, isn't it? Yes, it is.
100%. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so you could say that Mars is kind of how I see it in Vitex is working in sympathy. It's kind of pushing things up, building stuff up, Martian sort of hormonally. I mean, I did try and work it out in the estrogen progesterone cycle, but I'm not going to try and finish that up because on how Vitex worked on it, but because I'll only get myself into terrible confusion.
No, fair enough.
But
I can remember that, but we don't want to get overly
we don't want to
technical
get
on
over
the on
technical,
that front
and
either. I
it
mean, it's
tends to work more in antipathy. I felt to because it's often when there's an overproduction of estrogen or progesterone, it's balancing out. So
you,
it's
you,
almost it's
you're
working in antipathy to one of those to
you're
sort of say
100% right. I mean, just even on a technical level, because it's dopamine releasing. And one of the ways in which the hormones from the hormones that stimulate ovarian function released from the anterior pituitary, namely follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, FSH and LH, um, they are under what's known as tonic control by dopamine. So, like whenever dopamine is released, it puts the brake on them a little bit.
yes,
So Vitex actually increases that sort of dopamine brake on the hormone, the release of those hormones from the anterior pituitary. And if you go to very high doses of Vitex, it will put the brake on other hormones from the anterior pituitary. So as you were sort of implying, it's got some antipathy to Venus in that sense. It's like
exactly.
literally Venus wants to, get the hormones up and get more ovulation going and
Yes,
and have so because Venus is along with the moon, which also has her fall in Scorpio. Neither of those planets enjoy being in Scorpio. There's a sense in which maybe Vitex is but this is the whole thing about giving medicine. A small amount of something in antipathy to something else in certain circumstances can be exactly what's needed. So
Exactly, and that's the homeopathic treatment. So
yeah, or
and
just
often,
even the non-homeopathic, like low dose pharmacology, like
well,
as
quite,
in
yeah,
this case, because Vitex is typically given when you're using it to regulate rather than
yeah,
completely stop hormone release. You use it in very small
drop
doses.
doses, yes,
Yeah,
yes.
so I totally follow you around that bend, Ollie.
No,
Um,
I've never found a herbalist who agrees on the number of drops or whether to administer them in the morning or the evening. But there we go.
I just sort of I don't think one needs to be too esoteric about it. I just sort of like settle in like 5 ml in a weekly tincture is fine. I don't faff about with like 20 drops in the morning, blah blah, whatever, all these different esoteric dosage regimes. And I'm sure there'll be herbalists out there who disagree, and some herbalists who are more experienced with gynecological treatment who might have their own particular regimes.
Absolutely,
But
absolutely.
I've always found that 5 ml a week works fine.
So
So
that's Vitex, which I think is the classic Scorpio herb, because for men and women in the reproductive audience, which is bang
yes,
on for Scorpio.
it's an interesting one. It's an interesting one. I mean, bear in mind we are assigning some of these ourselves based on logic, but yeah, it is interesting because it actually decreases libido in men, though, which
I did
maybe
wonder
makes me
about
think.
that,
It
but
makes me think. I wonder if it might be a Saturn herb.
oh, it does have a bit of a
Do you know
Saturnian
what I
look,
mean?
doesn't
It's
it?
got that. It's got
Yeah,
that slightly
yeah.
fetid smell. It looks a bit shady to me. It always looks a bit dark. But then I might be projecting that onto it, and
That's
it does have
really
this
interesting.
stopping bleeding and stopping.
That's really, really interesting. And it's got
Mm.
that sort of and yet if you look at it, it's a bit of a straggly sort of it's a bit sad. But I was worried for my herbs hearing me.
No, it's we love the plant, so we're not no
but that is
pun not intended.
interesting.
No shade to the plant. If
And
we're
Saturn in Scorpio would work quite well, wouldn't it? Because it would
mm.
like restrict all those things and
Because
yeah, and
you'd think a
balance.
Mars in Scorpio, although it has that antipathy to Venus, as any planet situated in that sign would
Would,
do,
yeah.
it would have more of a stimulatory effect if we're going
Yeah,
with the
yeah.
symbolism on the male libido.
No, I really
Um,
like that. I have to change my mind. That's really interesting. Real
just a
food for
thought,
thought.
just because, yeah, I think we can be a bit iconoclastic here. And honestly, but the Mars, as you said, the Mars rulership of Vitex, I haven't found in any old book. I found it in
No,
modern
I,
ones, but
I
not in
will look
old
in
ones.
my modern book to see if it has it.
I know in the sort of magic literature, Scott Cunningham assigned it to Mars, I think, but
I don't take Scott Cunningham seriously, I'm afraid, Marcus. I think he made most
that's,
of it up. Sorry, Scott,
it's a
if you're
bit hard.
listening.
Right, while you're doing that, Ollie, I am going to get my plant
Yes,
up
yes.
if I can, and I think I'm going to go for this guy, which is Echium vulgari or Viper's bugloss. In fact, oh yeah, this photo is fine. The one with a little bee on it that I might try and get up, which is prettier. That got a bee on it? No, I thought I had one with a bee on it. Maybe I don't. Um, first one will do. Echium vulgari or Viper's bugloss.
Oh, yes.
And this is a herb. Culpeper says it's a herb of the sun. And if I can grab my copy of Culpeper, I'll read out what he says about it, because and then I'll say why I think this is a herb of the sun in Scorpio particularly. So Culpeper says it's a most gallant herb of the sun. It's a pity it's no more in use than it is. It's an especial remedy against the biting of the viper and all other venomous beasts, that is quite a claim, or serpents, as also against poison or poisonous herbs. Dioscorides and others say, whosoever shall take of the herb or root before they be bitten shall not be hurt by the poison of any serpent. The root or seed is thought to be more effectual to comfort the heart and expel sadness or causeless melancholy. It tempers the blood and allays hot fits of agues. That's kind of like fevers and joint pain, as what one might experience with malaria. The seed drunk in wine procures abundance of milk in women's breasts. The same also being taken eases the pains in the loins, back, and kidneys. The distilled water is used for all the same. I'm editing there. And there is a syrup made hereof for very effectual for the comforting of the heart and expelling sadness and melancholy. So the reason I love this plant, apart from the fact it's beautiful, it's a close relative of borage, which to which it bears a superficial resemblance, and it's in the same family. And borage, in astrological terms, we classify as a herb of Jupiter in Leo, and borage is used to treat melancholy, sort of depression, and very similar indications in a way. But Viper's bugloss, Culpeper says, is a herb of the sun, but I would definitely put it in Scorpio for the following reasons. Firstly, the association with the poison of serpents. Secondly, the appearance of the plant. It has this spotted stem, and it looks like it's soft and fluffy. Now that borage looks like it's fluffy, but it's slightly, slightly bristly. Yeah. This plant, God forbid you touch it without gloves on. Oh, God, because it looks like it's you've seen it, Ollie. It's just like it looks like it's soft, but actually the hairs break off, and they're worse than itching powder. Oh, they're God, painful. They're terrible, yeah. They get right into your skin. They can go through rubber gloves when you're harvesting it. So it's this plant that superficially looks very cuddly, but then when you get close, it hurts you. And I haven't really heard of anything more Scorpio-like than that. It's kind of like that. That's sort of like, it's got that weird paradoxical thing of, I'll look after you, but I'm going to hurt you, which is the water sign ruled by Mars vibe. It's kind of got that potential paradox in built. The association with healing serpents. And then the other thing, it's an incredibly useful herb. And I wouldn't substantiate the use for snake bite. I have no idea. But you'll remember I did a monograph on this herb some years ago, and it turns out that it contains, I think if I find the scientific research on it, it contains something called lithospermic acid, which prevents copper ion-induced lipid peroxidation and matrix metalloproteinase-induced gelatinolytic activity at very low concentrations in vitro. What that means is this compound in it, lithospermic acid, might actually deliver some literal anti-venom activity, because some snake venoms, particularly viper venoms, which this plant is named, are often hemotoxic, and European adder's venom causes local tissue damage, including edema, hemorrhage, and myonecrosis, or death of muscle cells. And the enzymes in snake venom often accelerate that, and they often utilize metal ions to catalyze the tissue destruction. So the lithospermic acid that's found in very high levels in Echium, because they prevent this copper ion-induced lipid peroxidation and blah, 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 it seems like, but this is only in vitro. So all we have is this little bit of rather tangential in vitro data that maybe there might be something to that. It was named specifically after the adder. So I do wonder whether it might have, but what we do know and what we do use it for in herbal medicine, and I have used it a few times with great success, is for bites and stings. You can just put the tincture on and it will just take the pain and inflammation away. Wow. It's fantastic. Wow. It's a really good addition to the herbal first aid kit for that. And I had a client came in a month ago or so, and I'm actually treating her for something different, but she was complaining that she'd been bitten by something and she'd had a terrible allergic reaction. It was still really painful. So I just gave her a little bottle of it, and she said her son had the same sort of problem. Obviously, son was much smaller and younger, and so it was worse for him. And she reported back a couple of days later that it was fantastic, worked very well. So Echium, I love for that.
That's really useful.
Yeah, so it is. Now, taking it internally, you'll know what I'm going to say here, Ollie, and another reason why I put it in Scorpio, it contains quite high amounts of pyrrolizidine alkaloids. Now, not crazy high, but high enough to be concerning. Pyrrolizidines are compounds that will build up in the liver, can cause eventual cumulative liver toxicity, and can even predispose to getting liver cancer years down the line. So I would say this is a plant that you might take internally for very short periods, maybe 2 or 3 weeks max. Maybe safest to use its friendlier cousin borage, which has much, much lower levels of pyrrolizidines in, and the ones in borage are less toxic as well. So the levels of pyrrolizidines in Viper's bugloss aren't super high, but it kind of, to me, it just adds to the Scorpio vibe of it. You've got this plant that looks really fuzzy and friendly, but actually will literally hurt you if you pick it up a little bit. It's got this really helpful medicinal activity against depression and potentially even some anti-venom activity, but if you take it for too long it will trash your liver. So so sun, Cool Pepper says the herb of the sun. I would put it as the sun in Scorpio for that reason, and also just the blue flowers for some reason make me think of Scorpio, and the fact that it kind of looks like a snake.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's my Viper's Bugloss. Yeah.
Okay, so my second one is not in the classic pharmacopoeia at all. It's an American herb which is very used now, which is saw palmetto. It's big pharma herbs are very into this. It's one of the very sort of industrialized ones.
Yeah.
It's an interesting, again, it grows 5 to 10 foot tall. It's a small tree. So that's a nice, that fitted into your Scorpio one set there.
Yes. Yeah.
It's also got red berries, which it's a real Mars signature for me. Also, that the fact that the leaves actually do look like saws or glaives or I think it's quite a martial looking sort of herb as well. So I'd be happy to put that under Mars. Particularly, it's classically used for prostate health. It's one of the go-tos for that, for support for that, and prostatic hyperplasia and things. Which is prostate enlargement. I've never used it for that, and I'm told that you need to. I think Chris Headley says it in his last book that you need to use it quite early on and for quite a considerable amount of time for best effect. It's not one of these ones. Take some saw palmetto and all the swelling.
Yeah, it doesn't seem that powerful to me for that purpose. Yeah.
So yeah, you have to. It works by hormone balancing again. I believe that
I think it's something to do with SHBG, but I can't. I wouldn't swear to it. I'd have to look it up.
And it converts testosterone into. Hang on, I've got it written down here. Dihydrotestosterone. So
doesn't it block the conversion of testosterone to DHT? More likely to be a blocker. I think it.
Maybe it is, yes. Maybe it is.
Because DHT increases prostate. I can't
read my own notes.
Growth.
I just
so it'll do something. So is it a 5-alpha reductase inhibitor?
I think so, because that's why it's useful in polycystic ovarian syndrome as well.
Yeah.
And apparently hair loss, which I suppose would make sense if you're getting a male pattern baldness due to a high testosterone level.
I did take it for ages, and I thought, I'm not sure it's doing anything. So
useful clinical point there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's also anti-inflammatory, presumably similarly, and urinary support, another Scorpio signature. It's good for that, and I guess from the prostate as well. Okay. But I think it basically also helps with the urinary tract in general to keep it healthy, and hair health, as we said. Also, another classic Scorpio. It's got aphrodisiac properties, but possibly just for that, from all the other things, sort of thing.
And I think is that for men and women, or more so for men, Olly?
I think it's more for men, I think, but also a bit for women. It's not clear. I just had aphrodisiac.
No, fair. I mean, it's just because I see it mentioned particularly in herbals for men or recommendations for male health.
Maybe because of all the other positive uses for men as well.
What have you found in practice? What have you found it to be helpful for?
I've hardly used it in practice. It's funny. I've always had a love for this herb because when I was studying herbal medicine back in the day, I had to give a talk on it. So I've always found it very interesting. But I've never had anybody come to me. I had, a little bottle of it waiting, who I thought, classic prostate stuff or polycystic stuff. It'll be really good for that. So, maybe they're kind of reading up now. Who knows?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because they say a lot about it. The American eclectics from the 19th century had a bit to say about it. And some of its uses, it seems to almost have some kind of like tonic or roborant effect. Like, but they used to use it for people who had consumption and stuff like that.
That's right, yes.
Yeah, so they use it sort of like an anabolic sort of tissue building, repairing remedy.
And the sort of and increased vitality as well, which maybe that's where the sort of the aphrodisiac properties come from.
Yes, maybe. What's interesting about it is obviously it's been prescribed for years now. Even mainstream, as you say, big pharma have got in on it a little bit for for BPH, benign prostate hypertrophy. But the latest studies have shown that it's sort of minimally symptomatically effective, or not effective at all. The latest meta-analyses. That may speak to what you're saying, Chris Headley was saying about the need to get in there early with higher doses.
Because, and that would be interesting, because probably, you know, if it's a classic experiment, they're not going to be doing it across a couple of years. Well, sometimes they do, but
no, they do standardized extract, fairly low dosage, 6 weeks, crossover trial, whatever.
Exactly. So, I'll go with Chris. He's pretty good on this. So if you want to use
Chris's
it,
recommendations were fabulous, and he's a very I mean, he's passed
get
away
it
now,
early and get them taking it, you know, for years, not months, sort of thing. So it's almost, you're using it as a preventative rather
and
than
a
anything
tonic,
else.
almost not quite like a food grade. I mean, it sort of has this rancid fat taste, which isn't very pleasant. So, but so it's not actually food, but it's almost food grade, sort of anabolic, tonic-y, strengthening herb, which is. No, that's a great pick, Ollie, and a really interesting one, which I think, and I almost wonder whether some of the focus on the prostate, as worthy as that is, might not turn out to be a bit of a red herring, given that some of its traditional uses were a bit more diverse than that, you know.
It's interesting. That should be the case. Yes, I wouldn't be surprised. Maybe you have time for another look at it
It might repay a bit of a deeper dive, that saw palmetto, because it's been pigeonholed, as herbs sometimes are, like hypericum is an antidepressant, saw palmetto is for prostate, and actually that, things are often a bit more nuanced than that. But it's a really interesting pick. And just I wanted to, you were saying about the Venus and we mentioned earlier Venus and the moon not being comfortable in Scorpio, which is true. They are in detriment in Venus and in fall in there. And the symbolic relevance of that is that, perhaps herbs assigned to Scorpio might have this dual function of having some, not necessarily, but having some sympathy with the anatomical regions which Scorpio rules, like the bowel or the bladder or the womb, the reproductive tract in general. Not necessarily, but some of the Scorpio herbs do have affinity with that region. But it may also be the case that they help to purge or diminish excessive functions of Venus and the moon. So I think that's where you were going earlier when we're talking about Vitex, wasn't it, Ollie? Where like a Scorpio herb might correct excesses of Venus. Like excess menstruation, too regular menstruation, wonky venous functions, could like potentially
PCOS
be wonky.
Would be a classic one, wouldn't it? A wonky venous function.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Or like a wonky moon function, like too much. And Venus and Moon traditionally ruled phlegm, so you could have herbs that correct excesses of phlegm or snot or discharges, that kind of thing. But the other thing I just wanted to briefly mention, because this is an astrological side note, Venus and the Moon also are not completely debilitated in Scorpio. They have a little bit of affinity with Scorpio because of it being a water sign. True. So the moon was said to have participating triplicity rulership in Scorpio, and Venus has triplicity rulership in Scorpio in the daytime. What that means is they're sort of weirdly comfortable there because it matches their nature, while the sign as a whole is against them. And I always think of that in terms of the, symbolically in the tropical zodiac, Scorpio in the northern hemisphere, but this is the symbolic origins of it, was associated with autumn. And it's always that season where everything's freaking dying, like all the leaves are falling off the trees. But you've also got, it's before the first frost, and you have the rose hips, and you have the seeds, and you have a lot of fruits that are sort of like, so you have this mixture of fecundity where the next generation is emerging, and death. And that's very, very Scorpio, because you've literally, if you think about the anatomy, you've literally got the reproductive tract where new life is made, sitting right next to the place where you eliminate crap. Literally, it's the whole thing.
Perfect.
So I just an interesting side note there, where Scorpio is one of these interestingly paradoxical signs. When we get onto Aquarius, we can talk about that as well, because I always say that they are the two most contrary signs in the zodiac. They're so interesting because their natures are sort of two-way simultaneously, I think, in a
Yeah,
way.
and seemingly, and their rulers are seemingly at odds with
Exactly,
their
yes.
elemental sort of signature.
Their
So
their ruling planet is opposite in nature to the sign, which is
yes.
just fascinating. So that's what makes them such curious creatures. So say, as we're saying, this is a Scorpio and an Aquarius rising, folks. So anyway,
No, yeah.
all right, so let's get on to the what are we looking at now? So yeah, this was my final pick, and this is cyclamen,
Oh,
or
yes.
cyclamen hederifolium, which I also did a monograph about years ago. Now, I have to confess, I've never used this as medicine. I grow it every year because I love this plant. It just makes me happy looking at it. It's so beautiful. There's something so Victorian about it, sort of like Aubrey Beardsley drawing. It's very decadent looking. But it's to me, this was assigned to Venus traditionally because it's a pretty flower, and it looks very Venusian. It's like the stems are very sort of like sinuous and elegant, and the flowers are like just beautiful little. But it's pretty toxic. Let me read you one of its. So I would definitely put this as Venus in Scorpio. One of its traditional names was sow bread, which means sort of pig's bread. And this is from a monograph I wrote on it a few years ago. In folklore, cakes made from the dried baked tubers were said to cause those who they are fed to fall violently in love, although later authors discounted this as fanciful. Taken internally, the tubers are a powerful irritant purgative. So maybe the falling in love, not the best thing. And a tincture of the fresh tuber externally applied over the bowels also has a purgative effect. An ointment made from the fresh tuber was thus used for expelling worms and applied to the navel of children or rubbed into the abdomen to cause vomiting for medicinal uses, presumably not recreationally. The fresh tubers were also bruised and applied as a stimulating application to indolent ulcers. Dioscorides also recommended the fresh juice snuffed up the nostrils to purge the head, drunk to counteract any kind of poison. Wouldn't recommend, by the way. 3 grams, that's a huge amount. That's 120 grams
Whoa.
taken with wine and honey for bile overflow or jaundice. And it
Whoa.
goes on. So that they also recommended cyclamen had a reputation for inducing miscarriage even when trodden on. So it had an oxytocic or
Oh, okay,
emmenagogic
yes.
effect, and of increasing the tendency to drunkenness if added to alcoholic drinks. So really, really interesting. So toxic, could bring on menstruation, purgative, could make emetic, could make you vomit, but also this weird paradoxical reputation as this sort of like tonic, and as something which would associate with love, I think mainly because its appearance.
Right.
And it's got all these interesting saponin glycosides in it. Now, the Russians developed a medicine from it called sinufort, a cyclamen europaeum extract from the bulbs, because it grows from corms. It's in the primrose family, but it has bulbs. It's one of bulby plants. So I think they used an extract of the bulbs. Marketed as sinufort, used as an intranasal spray for acute sinusitis. And it works by promoting mucus discharge. It just gets everything running, purges the head. But most trials found only modest symptom differences between placebo plus antibiotic versus sinufort plus antibiotic. But there were measurable improvements in sinus clearance, mucosal obstruction, and facial pain in the sinufort group. So there was symptomatic relief. And sinufort plus nasal saltwater rinse as a monotherapy without antibiotics also performed well when compared to antibiotic use. So really, really interesting Venus in Scorpio vibes there, because in Venus, as we were talking about, is in fall in Scorpio. Now, Venus is a phlegmatic planet. Scorpio is a phlegmatic sign. You'd expect these to have a lot to do with phlegm, but one of the functions of Venus traditionally was purgation. Venus and the moon ruled the eliminative function, didn't they, Ollie? Is that right? Sort of expulsive.
Yes, they did.
Expulsive. Yeah, the expulsive
Yes.
virtue. So you'd expect Venus in Scorpio to be extra expulsive, because
Yes, yes.
and which cyclamen certainly is. you expect Venus in Scorpio to look pretty and be kind of toxic, which cyclamen certainly
Yeah.
is. And the association with bringing on childbirth or miscarriage is very Scorpio, because that's that part of the body, and Venus in detriment in that sign. I felt that just really fit.
And of course, the whole sinus thing is like a Mars nose signature, isn't it? Which
Yes, yes. So Mars rules Venus and Aries, and Aries is the sign that rules ahead. So there's some like those signs which shared common rulership going back to very ancient astrology, like Marcus Manilius, the Roman astrologer, would be said to have some kind of resonance with each other. But I mean, one can't stretch these things too far, but definitely a Venus in Scorpio. But in terms of using it, I probably wouldn't. I don't think I'd dare use it internally, but I do think it sounds like it's. I say Viper's Bugloss I have used externally. This one I haven't, even though I grow it all the time. But one of the ways I think it could perhaps be used is if you dried the tuber and then sort of you could dry it and then slice it or powder it and then make a little infusion and use that in a neti pot or some kind of sinus wash. Yes. And it would have an irritating effect and just get everything moving.
Right. Yes.
So, obviously that you've got this over-the-counter Sinufort that you could buy if it's available wherever you are. But that would be one herbal way. And I suspect maybe if it works as a purgative, as an ointment applied to the abdomen, then one could probably make a cream out of it, like the root or whatever, and use that over the sinuses if one had sinusitis. Yes. And maybe use a weak infusion as a wash. Because the thing about from Dioscorides saying, so what was the Dioscorides bit? He said to use the fresh juice, I think, to purge the head. Dioscorides recommended the fresh juice snuffed up the nostrils to purge the head. So obviously you can't be pulping fresh cyclamen roots to snuff the, what I mean? It's just not practical. But unless you happen to have some and you have sinusitis, you think I'm up for some crazy experiment. And of course, if you're going to do that, you need to wash them first really well. I'd suggest steam them slightly as well. So wash them really well, steam them just to kill any bacteria on the external of it, and then juice them, like just pulp them or grate them or pulp them with a little bit of honey, and then you could maybe snort that. But it doesn't sound great. I would probably just dry the roots.
I think drying them and doing tisane them.
Yeah, just with a neti pot, so you make a little weak infusion and then dribble it from one nostril to the other.
Also you can, like, if it's too strong, you can dilute it more or whatever, and so it's going to give you a lot more control over the sort of
and you're not, and I wouldn't want people insufflating it, like getting it right up into the sinuses, particularly if it's a homemade preparation, because if it's not, you've got some bacteria in there, or if you have a bad reaction to it, not worth it. But you could create a little weak infusion, put that in a neti pot, and you could probably also create a little ointment of it and try that just over the sinuses and see if that just got things moving, which it sounds to me like it might. So this is a plant I'm definitely going to be experimenting with at some point, if I can bear to dig any up, because once it's growing, I don't want to do it. Oh, and the other reason it's a Scorpio plant, of course, is it comes into flower now. It flowers from September through sort of the whole of autumn. Yeah. So anyway, that's our little Scorpio selection.
So and come Sagittarius, we'll probably do on Sagittarius as well.
Yes, we will, which will be a real doozy, because I think both of us have said before it's really tricky to find.
It's not going to be a problem. It'll be a challenge.
It'll be a challenge, but I think it'd be a good challenge, because we need to think about what planets might be fitted into Sagittarius. I already have a couple of ideas, but so I think we'll leave it there, folks. If you enjoyed it, just do the things like it, share it, and hopefully, and hello to any new subscribers, and hope you enjoy it. And we'll see you in the next one. All right.
You have to do a bit of editing on that, Marcos, I think.
Oh God, yes.